So let's head back to the United States. The possibility of more US sanctions on Russia, the punishment for meddling in the US elections in 2016. Nina Burleigh is the national politics correspondent for Newsweek and joins us live from New York. What do you make of this sanctions package? Because here you have the House about to vote for new sanctions when Donald Trump's spokesman over the weekend was saying he's still not convinced Russia was involved in the hacking.
Well, I think Donald Trump is going to allow that to happen because he's going to be distracted by the constitutional crisis that he's about to foment by firing the Attorney General. And I think that the Russia sanctions will go forward. It's a sign that the Republicans in the House and the Senate are beginning to break away from him. You saw yesterday the Speaker of the House chiding him about his beleaguered Attorney General Sessions tweet, and I think you're going to see a bit more of that. What's interesting is in the Senate, they're going to, it looks like, pass the health care bill. They've got Rand Paul on board now, the libertarian who wanted less assistance to the needy than more, and now he's been persuaded to jump on. So interesting things happening all around.
They really are, and I'll come to some of those you touched on, the Attorney General. I'll come back to that in a moment, but specifically on sanctions on Russia. Of course, Donald Trump wanted to reset relations with Russia. Do you think with this bill, will he use his veto?
Wow, that's a good question. I am going to take a wild guess and say no. I don't think he can. I think he needs their support. He needs their loyalty for what's ahead.
Well, let's talk about what's ahead, because I've just done a really quick list. You've got the Russian investigation now at Trump's inner circle. You have him lashing out again today against Jeff Sessions, calling him weak for recusing himself from the Russia investigation. Reports of Rex Tillerson thinking about calling it a day. The mess on healthcare, the president exploring whether he can pardon himself and his family, stories about firing Robert Mueller. I mean, is this an administration that is consuming itself?
Well, it certainly looks that way from the outside, but my sources tell me that on the inside, and this is where we're crossing the matrix. On the inside, they're still talking about 8 years of Donald followed by 8 years of Ivanka. So his people, his loyalists, the people inside are not seeing this the way that we're seeing it. They've, and this is a person. The president is a man who has spent his career in New York bending the laws to fit his business practices. He has gotten away with it for decades. So, there is a question about whether he will, when he foments this constitutional crisis, which we are about to see happen, I think, whether he will go farther than Nixon did and keep going down. Nixon stopped after firing 3, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong. He got to Robert Bork, and then that was it. Curtains. I don't think that you're going to see him stop like that. I'm
going to put on the screen some of Donald Trump's tweets today, because Jeff Sessions was one of the focal points, calling him weak in one of the tweets that is there on our screen. You talk about a constitutional crisis. You use that phrase a couple of times. Just explain why it would be a constitutional crisis if he fired him, and how close do you think we are to that moment?
Well, it's a constitutional crisis if he challenges the Department of Justice to do his bidding, without allowing the Department of Justice to operate the way that it is supposed to. So it's a constitutional crisis when he throws out the Attorney General and then tries to get the number 2 to, well, that's Rod Rosenstein, who hired Mueller, to fire Mueller. That is a constitutional crisis. That is a challenge to the Constitution of the United States, a Constitution that has 3 separate branches of government, a Constitution that guarantees that business is done according to the laws. And what's going to happen is, if he starts firing these people, the Justice Department going down the list, the people in the Congress, the Republicans in the Congress, are going to have to take a look at this, and it's a question of how long are they going to let this go on, because clearly what he's doing is trying to stop the investigation because Mueller has access to his tax returns, which he has coveted and hidden from us, and he will be in a situation where his family business is about to be revealed for what it is. The loans that he's gotten, this whole issue of Russia sanctions and Russia collusion and so on is I think, somewhat of a diversion from the real story, the real issue of the question of what Trump got from the Russians when he was a private businessman. And those are the things that he's trying to hide.
You said earlier he's about to cross a divide. A twin final thought then. What is the route map that you expect in the coming weeks and months on this? And the broader question, are people outside of politics, of the media, what is their view? Is that moving at all on Trump and this whole Russia story?
Well, okay, the answer to your first question, the route map, honestly, we are in uncharted territory. I mean, I could say things to you, but I really don't know what goes on after he fires all three. If he goes down the list and fires one after another, it's going to depend on the Republicans and how they respond, and whether they stick up for Mueller, and whether they begin to talk about, the next step here. Which is, from the outside, from the people who don't want him in there, would be impeachment. As far as his fans, as far as people outside of our circle, I think, well, you have people who are not supporters of his, who are, alarmed, I think, and somewhat maybe gleeful that he's getting himself deeper and deeper into the briar patch. But he still has 36% support in the polls. That's historically low, but it remains what people consider to be his base. It also is a number that Republicans look at as their primary voters. When that number starts to drop, I think you're going to see Republicans jumping off. I can't imagine that those 36% are going to respond to this, though, because they don't really seem to care about some of these matters. They don't care about the Russia collusion. That's clear. It's not a concern of theirs. They didn't elect him they elected him for other reasons. They like his personality. It's an emotional thing. They think that he's going to be able to dig them out of their whole. There also is, we haven't talked about the donors, the big donors, the billionaire donors like the Mercers and the Kochs, perfectly happy with having this man in power, at least through October, because they want the tax cuts. Yep. They want this health care bill, they want socialism over, and they want tax cuts.
Nina, we could talk for some while, but we've run out of time. Thank you very much for that analysis there from our studios in New York. Thank you.